welcome to the Ogles channel. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, it should come as no surprise that Link's Awakening is one of my all-time favorite games. I'm not talking about just like favorite Zelda games. I'm talking about one of my all-time favorite games in general. Now, I loved it. I mean, over the last 20 years, I've played it so many times, and I've always been pulled into just the charm of the story, the atmosphere. Fantastic game. Now, when I heard it's being remade on Nintendoswitch, I'll admit, I had some reservations about that because how can you remake a game that's already perfect? However, the remake came out and it didn't take more than just a couple of hours for me to realize that not only were they completely faithful to the original game, but they actually found ways to make an already perfect game more perfect. Which I guess made me realize the original game had flaws? That's not very nice. But seriously, the remake to this game is fantastic. First off, let's talk about the graphics. The original Link's Awakening had amazing graphics on the Game Boy at the time, and despite having a fairly dark concept, it focused on creating a very charming, cartoony world that was extremely becoming to the player. The remake has captured that exact same essence. The world is gorgeous and reminds me a lot of a polished Rudolph and the Isle of Misfit Toys look. The cartoonish elements are all here and the charm shines through better than ever. The scenery, the characters, the enemies, they all look fantastic and what I always dreamed of as a kid. The only part of the graphics I didn't care for as much were a few of the bosses in the game. They came across as a bit more gross, I guess, than charming like they did in the original game. But even that complaint is just for a couple of the bosses, and the rest were just as good, if not better than the originals. But back to the phenomenal graphic upgrades. Let's talk about the animation at the start and the closing of the game. The style of cartoon that they chose to go with held true to the 90s Zelda and looked straight out of a television show, and not the cartoon Zelda show from the 80s.
Hey! Excuse me, princess!
What I always dreamed a Zelda cartoon could look like. I'm glad they chose to keep this in the traditional Zelda style and not use the graphics from the game itself. I feel by doing this, it lends even more to the idea that the entire game was just a dream because now the dream world and the real world are separated stylistically. The gameplay of the remake also made several changes that created a much more user-friendly experience. Because the Game Boy only had 2 buttons, you had to constantly be rotating your items in and out and back and forth. I never had an issue with this while playing the original, but it was a complete time waster, although necessary at the time. With the remake, they have made the sword, the shield, and the Pegasus boots all permanent buttons. They made the power ring always equipped, and all the other items are interchangeable between the X and the Y buttons. This allows you to basically have 6 items equipped at any given time. You don't have to constantly interrupt gameplay to swap items out. I did not know I needed this new style, but now it would be even harder to go back to the old way. This game also introduced bottles back into the game. Now, bottles have been around in pretty much every Zelda game since this one, but it was new for this one and you could finally put fairies in a bottle, and I found this very convenient to have during the game. I used the fairies multiple times through my journey, all the way up until the final nightmare. Nintendo also made traveling the map and dungeons way easier and more convenient in this game as well. There are several more warp stations and a new pin feature on the map to go along with it. The pin feature allows you to mark locations around the overworld or in the dungeons to help you remember where certain items, puzzles, or paths are located. I end up using this feature a lot, especially in the dungeons toward the end of the game where I needed to remember where certain staircases went and items and things like that. The fighting is tweaked a bit in this game as well to make it a little more complex. No longer you just simply hit all the enemies with your sword, but now you actually get to duel with them to defeat some of them. You get to block and you parry them, and it's not a huge difference, but it's just enough mix-up to allow you to think more and get a little more involved in the game. They also changed a few of the boss and the mini-boss battles as well. And this is honestly a welcome change because it forced me to develop some new strategies for the bosses and allowed the game to feel like it had evolved more past the original instead of just being a complete copy. Now, to make it feel like you got even a more bang for your buck if playing the original just simply wasn't enough, Nintendo has also included a couple of new modes into the game. They added a hero mode where the game is harder for more experienced players, which I think is a great way to add replayability to the game. It's not swapped up that much, it's just simply more difficult, you don't get as many heart pieces throughout and things like that. I haven't gone through the full mode yet, but I fully intend to. They also added what is called a dungeon creator. Now the dungeon creator, I'm not crazy about because this has never been a dream of mine. I've never played through a Zelda game and thought, man, I really want to create my own dungeon. However, this might be some people's thing, and I'm sure they're going to have a lot of fun with it. But I do think it is a massive missed opportunity to not allow these dungeons to be put online like Mario Maker levels. I don't like the idea of having to have an amiibo to share levels with local people only. This seems like Nintendo was just looking for a way to push amiibo sales or sort of bring them back a bit, or maybe they just thought to themselves, what is the most inconvenient way to share levels, and let's do that. Because for some unknown reason, Nintendo seems to flock to that mentality. Now, as much as I truly do love the majority of the changes in this game and all of the new features and whatnot, I would like to take just a second to talk about how special it truly is of the things that they didn't change. The dialogue, the story, the overall feel of the game, it's all there intact in its original form, unchanged. They could have so easily changed these things to make it fit more of a new generation, but they knew how timeless their story was and the environment was, and they left it the same. They even left some of the little details the same, like the books on top of the bookshelf, or the trading game sequence, or even they left a color dungeon in the game. They could have so easily left out the color dungeon in this game and no one would have blinked an eye, but they put it in there for fan service because we knew about it. But there's so many things that are just timeless from the original that they didn't change a single bit, and I'm so excited about that because this has always been one of my favorite Zelda storylines, and I'm just glad they left it alone. It was really hard for me to imagine when this game was first announced, but Nintendo has actually found a way to take one of our all-time greatest games and make it better. To me, this is the definitive edition of Link's Awakening. When I go back to replay it or share it with my children one day, this is the version that I want them to play, or the one that I would go to. I give the new Link's Awakening a 9.5 out of 10. I am going to take a 0.5 off just for the fail of the Dungeon Maker, because it's just not really my thing. But besides that, this is a perfect game to me. If you haven't picked up your own copy of Link's Awakening yet, I highly recommend it. But thanks again so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I upload every Tuesday and Thursday and occasionally bonus videos throughout the week as well. And as always, find a great game to play and just have a fantastic day.